Great. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Fireside Adoptees. We're so excited today to start off our Fireside Adoptees Wellness series. And today we have Kimberly Weeks, who is a psychotherapist, who is going to be doing a presentation on adoption is trauma. Thank you so much. Kimberly?
All right, here we go. I'm going to share my screen. And hopefully y'all can see this. Everybody can see it? Okay. So today I'm going to be talking about how adoption is trauma. And okay, see, we're having a little glitch here. I'll try one more time. I knew this might happen. It's been acting a little weird. So we're going to try it from the beginning here. Sorry, guys. All right, so I am a licensed clinical social worker. I'm a certified alcohol and drug addiction counselor, and I am an EMDR certified therapist. Starting off with a quote from The Body Keeps the Score. We have learned that trauma is not just an event that took place sometime in the past. It is also the imprint left by that experience on the mind, brain, and body. There are 331.4 million Americans, and over 6 million are adopted. There are approximately 135,000 children who are adopted in the United States each year, and of non-step parent adoptions, about 59% are from the child welfare foster system, 26% are from other countries, and 15% are voluntarily relinquished American babies. I was a voluntarily relinquished American baby born in late July of 1981. I spent 9 months with my biological mother, only to come into the world alone. She never held me or even looked at me. My biological parents created me, but neither of them wanted me. I was a mistake and an inconvenience that they needed to get rid of, and adoption gave them a way out of the responsibility of becoming a parent. I spent my first few weeks of life in a foster home. The rest of my life, until 2013, was spent in the fog. When children are adopted, they enter into a family system in which they really don't genetically fit. So they have the impossible job of having to be somebody that they never could be to fix a wound. Throughout my childhood, I was often told, your birth mother loved you so much that she gave you up so that you could have a better life. So this statement is not entirely true, yet it's not entirely false, but really it's the only narrative that I was ever provided and the only truth that I had been taught to believe. For many years, I said things like, I've accepted my life and I am at peace with my adoption. I've never searched my birth parents or ever wanted to search because I already have parents. I used to refer to my biological mother as my birth mother and said only affirmative things about her throughout my life. I presented her relinquishment of me in a positive light. Now, I look at my biological parents much differently. My biological father is a man named Bruce who didn't want me and chose not to raise me. My biological mother is a woman named Darlene who allowed me to live in her uterus for 9 months, but ultimately did not want me and made the decision not to raise me. I was rejected and discarded. I was abandoned and left for other adults to take care of. I was taken from the woman who gave birth to me immediately after I was born. She never held me or spoke to me or connected with me in any way. And this is totally legal. In the United States, a child is legally available to be adopted between the ages of birth to 18 years old, and is considered legally free to be adopted when the birth parents have had their parental rights terminated or have consented to the child's adoption. When it comes to adoptions, dogs appear to have more rights than humans. An 8-week-old dog is approximately the equivalent age of a 9-month-old human baby, and both are in the infant stage, where puppies and babies are developing teeth. While it is perfectly acceptable for a human being to be separated from his or her biological mother at birth, it is considered unhealthy, reckless conduct, cruelty, and disruptive to physiological and psychological development for a puppy who is younger than 8 weeks to be separated from its mother. So while human babies can be separated from their biological mothers at birth, puppies cannot be taken from their mothers until a certain age because the research shows that the stress of early separation disrupts the puppy's physiological and psychological development. Puppies who are separated from their mother early typically develop behavioral problems, including anxiety, attachment issues, and aggression. The American Kennel Club and the United Kennel Club both recommend that for healthy development, puppies should be between 8 to 12 weeks of age when they are separated from their mother. In the US, 28 states have laws or regulations that govern how old a puppy must be to be sold or rehomed. And of the states with laws, all but 3 of them state that a puppy must be at least 8 weeks old to be sold. And again, that's the age of a 9-month-old human. A retailer who sells a puppy that is not yet weaned is not acting in the puppy's best interests. And should the puppy go on to suffer or die because of the seller's reckless conduct, they could face charges of animal cruelty. The loss for the adoptee, it's unlike any other losses we have come to expect in a lifetime, such as death and divorce. Adoption is more pervasive, less socially recognized, and more profound. A baby being rejected and abandoned by their biological mother is a trauma. Experts have considered separation from a child's biological parents, even as an infant, a traumatic event. In cases where the separation is the result of neglect, abuse, or death, the trauma is intensified. The trauma of adoption can potentially have negative effects on adoptees' physiological, social, and emotional development across all stages of life. According to some research, adoptees are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than non-adoptees. There's other research to suggest that adoptees are more likely to abuse mood-altering substances than their non-adopted peers due to trauma in their early childhood. Research has also found that common childhood psychological disorders are more prevalent in adoptees than non-adoptees. Borderline personality disorder has been associated with adoptees, and research discovered that adoptees had increased odds of developing a personality disorder when compared with non-adoptees. Many times, adoptees' mental health issues and substance abuse issues are the result of known or unknown trauma or of undiagnosed trauma response. One day, after 30-something years, I finally had an awakening that many adoptees call coming out of the fog. The term being in the fog is often used to describe the way adoptees feel, think, operate, and relate before they come out of the denial, conditioning, and ignorance that distorts the impacts of adoption and relinquishment trauma. I began coming out of the fog after experiencing reunion and meeting the people who voluntarily relinquished me, Darlene and Bruce. If I had been kidnapped as a baby, or if my entire family had died when I was a baby, my story would be much different because society would understand these experiences to be traumatic to a child. The general narrative of adoption is not one of trauma, but of love and generosity. Adoptive parents are typically viewed as wonderful, selfless people, and most adoptees are expected to be grateful and consider themselves lucky. Society views adoption through a distorted lens, and this perception appears to intentionally disregard the fact that adoption is trauma. The narrative that most adoptees have been taught comes directly from the culture that has been shaped by marketing entities with the goal of creating a specific viewpoint. Adoption propaganda sugarcoats the reality of the situation to make it more emotionally comfortable for people. No one wants to focus on the fact that in order for adoption to happen, there must first be relinquishment. Acknowledging this leads to accepting that relinquishment is a trauma. Adoptees refer to this relinquishment trauma as the primal wound. The primal wound theory suggests that severing the connection between the infant and biological mother through adoption causes a primal wound, which often manifests in a sense of loss, basic mistrust, emotional and/or behavioral problems, and difficulties in relationships with significant others, which affects an adoptee's sense of self, self-esteem, and self-worth throughout life. Before we had a concept of self and others, we were ripped apart. Because of this, we are often afraid to trust. Because we are afraid to trust, we have a tendency not to let others be close to us. And because of this, we're on our own. When trauma occurs pre-verbally, the beliefs that are formed become quite difficult to recognize, and it may take many years to discover the wound. I did not recognize the primal wound in myself until I met Darlene and Bruce when I was in my early 30s. It wasn't until I was face to face with them that I realized just how deep the primal wound had been buried. And that is when I began to come out of the fog. Many adoptees never consider adoption to be a trauma until later in their life, when they begin to experience mental health issues and/or substance abuse issues, or when they finally just begin to come out of the fog. So I've mentioned the fog, and many of us know what the fog is, but just to clarify, the term being in the fog is often used to describe the way adoptees feel, think, operate, and relate before they come out of the denial, conditioning, and ignorance that distorts the impacts of adoption and relinquishment trauma. Many adoptees who have come out of the fog believe that the adoptees who say they have no pain or loss from adoption are simply not in touch with it or are not ready to deal with it yet. Some adoptees remain in the fog because it is a coping mechanism for them, and others simply have no clue about their own adoption issues. Coming out of the fog can be a brutal awakening. Many adoptees eventually seek out support and usually say something like, "I never thought adoption was an issue for me until..." For some, it might be experiencing reunion with birth parents like it was for me, but for others, it might be experiencing the birth of their own children, or it could happen after the death of one of their adoptive parents. Whatever the occurring event that brings adoption issues back to the forefront of their own consciousness, adoptees will only come out of the fog when they are ready. A trauma is an experience that causes one to develop erroneous beliefs about oneself or the world, and to behave in ways that are not skillful. Many adoptees have issues related to attachment ruptures. The internalized belief or negative cognition that an adopted child develops may sound something like, "It's not safe to trust," or "People I love leave me." An adult who is adopted may unknowingly recreate abandonment scenarios in relationships, unconsciously choosing partners who are not truly available and do leave, fulfilling the negative belief, "I am not worth it," or "I am not lovable." An infant or child separated from their birth mother will almost certainly experience some level of trauma, as they will perceive this event to be a dangerous situation. The sensations, sights, and sounds with which they were familiar are gone, and the mother is no longer available to soothe the child or help the child self-regulate. Since the only part of the brain that is fully developed at birth is the brainstem, which controls the sympathetic nervous system that generates the fight, flight, or freeze response, babies are unable to use parasympathetic abilities such as self-soothing. When this happens at a very young age, it is encoded as implicit memory, just like any event that takes place before the development of language. The trauma that adoptees have experienced is significant because while the adoption of a child is a single event fixed in time with a beginning and an end, the impact is a far-reaching process that continues throughout the adoptee's life. What happens in our childhood doesn't always stay in our childhood. When a baby or young child is removed from their mother's care, the safety-inducing sounds and smells which the infant responds to within the supernatural attachment between a mother and a child is broken. The breaking of this biological bond causes the baby or young child to feel unsafe and afraid as they are given to complete strangers and enter a new world where they experience unfamiliar sounds and smells, which is perceived by the child to be a dangerous situation. Early relinquishment causes a trauma within a young, undeveloped brain. For many adoptees, the trauma occurred before we developed language to explain the events, and so our memories are primarily somatic, stored in our nervous system. Our brains have a natural way to recover from traumatic events and memories. And this process involves communication between the amygdala, which is triggered by stressful events, the hippocampus, which assists with learning and memories about safety versus danger, and the prefrontal cortex, which regulates behaviors and emotions. So when a traumatic event occurs or something happens that is perceived as traumatic, the associated memories can be stored in the brain and nervous system in a maladaptive way, frozen rather than processed. Current reactions are fueled by negative beliefs stemming from events that occurred in the past. People become stuck. In some cases, trauma that happened years ago continues to feel like it is happening in the present. The adoptee's reaction to an experience within the present moment might be disproportionate to the situation because the fight, flight, or freeze response has become activated in the situation, meaning a memory from the past has been triggered, causing the part of the brain that controls executive functioning and decision-making to go offline. The adoptee might feel dysregulated, scared, and confused. So trauma affects the brain. This is a little diagram of that. So right here we have the prefrontal cortex, and this is the part of the brain that, of course, is responsible for our rational thinking, our logic. Then here's the amygdala, which is, of course, wild for survival. So when active, it is hard to think rationally. And then the hippocampus is responsible for memory and differentiating between past and present. So the hippocampus is working to make sense of the trauma. EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, has been empirically validated as being a very effective treatment for decreasing or altogether stopping distressing symptoms for many clients. When traumatic events become so overwhelming, they can get stored in their raw, unprocessed form, and then these memories are easily triggered, which lead to symptoms and distress. More than 7 million people have been treated successfully with EMDR by 110,000 therapists in 130 countries since 2016. And EMDR combines therapy and eye movements or other types of stimulus, including sounds or tapping, and it helps access the processed unresolved traumatic memories. It can treat a variety of mental health issues, including anxiety, depression, eating disorders, grief and loss, even sleep issues, and of course, PTSD. This little diagram right here is kind of giving a little explanation: eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's reducing symptoms. So it has a direct effect on the way the brain processes information and releases emotional experiences that become trapped in the nervous system. It does this through bilateral stimulation. So something that you can see, you can hear, you can touch, and it's moving in a side-to-side pattern. So frequently it's just moving your eyes back and forth. The disturbing memories are reprocessed by the brain, and this results in painful feelings being exchanged for more resolved, peaceful feelings. And there's a great success rate with EMDR. So the goal of eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy, EMDR, is to resolve unprocessed traumatic memories in the brain and transform old traumatic memories into new positive associations of healing. So on Sunday, the 29th of this month, I will be presenting part 2. So all of this is kind of to give a base for presenting EMDR and how it has a healing role in the trauma of adoption. So this concludes my presentation of part 1, adoption is trauma, and I hope to see you on the 29th for part 2, the healing role of EMDR in the trauma of adoption. Thank you so much for being a part of this. And I'm going to end the recording.